Hello. Hello. My name is Kamala Patney, and I'm founder of Celebrate Our Similarities. Uh, I welcome you all to Mana Utsav event, and I'm really pleased to be bringing in master students and PhD students and getting a flavor of their experiences as part of the Human Festival. And today, right now, we have Sagnik Bhattacharya. Hello, Sagnik.
Hello, ma'am.
How are you today?
I'm, I'm fine, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you on board. Where are you actually right now?
I'm in home, Kolkata. It's in the eastern coast of India.
Uh-huh. Right. Okay. That's good. So you studied at Leicester DMU as well, I'm assuming.
No, I
Yes.
studied at Surrey, University of Surrey in southeast England.
Ah, right. Okay. Okay. That's good to me. So what did you study? What give us a little bit of a background as to what you
Uh,
studied.
so I did my master's in criminology.
Right. Okay.
So, but my dissertation was on a very intersectional field of like criminology and social identity of marginalized populations.
Right. Okay.
That's actually my interest of research, like discrimination, marginalized population, and how they negotiate their identity in social spheres.
Uh-huh. Okay. That's an interesting area. That quite interests me as well as to, the marginalized
Mhm.
communities' life chances are sort of, skewed towards living in poverty and all the
Yes,
associated factors that then lead to, criminalization as well and that
yes.
kind of thing. So now that's quite interesting. So we'll hear more about it and maybe. Tell me, why did you choose that topic? What brought you to that research?
Well, actually, there wasn't any, like, I didn't start the course with the plan to do the dissertation in that particular topic. It was actually like there was this workshop on Holocaust and how we have moved away or a very different form of discrimination in the present modern era. And after the workshop, I remember like we were talking, like we were just discussing the various aspects, some of my professors and some of the students. And I remember one of my professors saying that major forms of discrimination are not hate crime. Rather, hate crime or the violent and extremist forms of the hate crime are very rare occurrences. But what happens on an everyday basis is a very mundane, routinized, and systemic discrimination. So that got me thinking about some of the experiences, not my experiences, but something I have witnessed and observed from like my life at the university. I remember like during the welcome week of the university, most of the events would be and like around the pub culture, which is quite prominent in Britain. So like pub quizzes, bar crawl, and even like during most of these events, I would say like the for like my acquaintances who are Muslims were not able to participate because the majority of the theme was around alcohol consumption.
Mm,
So they wouldn't be able to participate. So naturally, they were getting excluded.
mm,
So it actually got me, that recollection actually got me thinking. So, is there a relation between not being able to participate in this daily interactions of the university have any relation to their discrimination on and a very, and is there any discrimination on a daily basis?
mm,
So from that, I actually, with a really thorough discussion with my supervisor, I got into the topic I chose actually.
mhm. Wow, that's quite interesting that your observation in your physical environment brought you to that sort of subject area. That's quite interesting as well. Yeah, I'd agree that cultural differences can have impact on life chances as
Mhm.
well, and in so many different ways. But so how did you find your journey in doing this research? Um,
Well, if I had to put it in one word, not okay. It was anxiety filled, honestly, because it was COVID, first of all.
That's right.
So majority of my the literature review I wanted to do, I could not because our library closed on 26th of March. And like the digital library we had was only a fraction of what we had in the library,
Mm-hmm.
what I required. So that was a source of panic. Like for the first few weeks, I could not think how to proceed. And
Mm-hmm.
then there was again, due to COVID, a lot of participants were withdrawing. Like initially, I thought that I would do a participant observation, like how they interact in their lectures, in group projects, and then I would conduct an interview. So half of my data collection method was gone with the COVID. So I had to completely depend on interviews. And the problem with interviews was that it had to be conducted digitally. And like I did a qualitative study, so digitally it is quite difficult to build that amount of rapport as you can while talking face to face. So that was another difficulty, but I had a very supportive faculty with me.
Mm-hmm.
Like my supervisor was very supportive. So any difficulty I had, he would have usually not, like tell me a way out, but help me solve it. So like initially when we started the project, we thought that we need on around 20 to 25 participants. But when everybody was withdrawing, and I approached almost 4 universities, and almost a lot of them were withdrawing after initial eagerness to join. And
Mm-hmm.
when I told my supervisor, he reminded me that the purpose of the study is not to reach a particular amount of participants because it's a qualitative study. The aim is to get a theoretical saturation, that no new ideas are coming up. That is theoretical saturation. So our aim was that. So as soon as I have that in my data, I do not need to look further for data. And when I analyzed the data, I found it actually that I have reached theoretical saturation. So I moved on with around 15 to 17 participants instead of the initial 25 plan. So though COVID posed uh, quite a few challenges, it actually helped me understanding what field research is about, like facing difficulties and learning to solve them. So
Mm.
that was how my research was.
Yeah, practical experience within the
Yes.
context as well. That's good. So, what kind of participants did you have? I mean, I meant to ask you when did you start the your research? What when exactly did you start it, and when did it
So
complete?
so I started the there were it was in several stages. In the pilot, I did it in from around end of February to the beginning of March. There were it was inclusive of participant observation, and I found the participant observation at in the pilot stage very useful. So I was actually disheartened for that a useful aspect of the study is going to away after the COVID thing.
Mm-hmm.
So after the pilot study in March, I started my data collection from middle to end April, and my target population was students of Pakistani and Bangladeshi descendant, like whose parents or forefathers migrated to Britain, as well as I later on added international students as well to get a very different view of the perspective. Like, is it because they grew up in the British society that they have this perspective, or is it because there is another ethnocultural aspect of the problem? So I added international students who came here from Pakistan and Bangladesh. So that was my target population.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, as an outsider, give me an idea of what it was that. So when you were looking at those participants from
Mhm.
um, Bangladeshi and Pakistani background, whose parents had emigrated, what were you aiming to home in on for your research? Give me an idea of that.
Honestly, if I like the most difficult part of the research was positioning myself as a researcher and understanding their problem, because like if I take my position in my society in India, I grew up as a majority in India. I have never been discriminated in any way, so it was quite difficult for me to understand their perspective. I always thought, how can someone's religion uh, be a restrictive force in their participation?
Mm,
So, like, I was getting the idea that they have to do a certain forms of duties in terms of their religion, a form of self-discipline, but I did not know to what extent was it restrictive. I always had this aspect that religion was all about the supernatural aspect, like who to worship. But as I started the data, I had to change my perspective, rather refine it, when I learned that religion is not about, like sometimes religion can also be not about who you worship, but as a form of living your life, the way you're living your life, a lifestyle. So some of the problems that they had was regarding their identity, how they perceive themselves. Some of them put forward their religion forward, like their religious identity came first. So like it might be felt that it's a very negative thing, that why will someone place their religious identity first to their national identity. That is where I actually learned that their religious identity is a way of living their life, a way of discipline, rather than a way of loyalty. It is through their religion that they chose to define their nationality. They were British, but they were Muslims first. That the religion, for some of them, not all of them, this was just like the sample size was 17, so this cannot be at any stage generalized. So some of them felt that their religious obligations came first to serve the society. It was not that they will serve their religion first.
That's
So
it.
that was, yes, that was one first thing that I actually had to change about my own perception before going further into the study.
Wow.
And yeah, and actually, and another, like this was, some parts were really uplifting, like that made me happy, but some other parts, uh, like how they perceive themselves as an outsider. I remember this particular quote. This boy who grew up in Britain, who grew up in London, he said that for the British, I would always be a Muslim in Britain rather than a British Muslim. So that way of identifying was quite linked to their own experience in their, like in the school, in their universities, in their daily interactions, honestly.
I mean, it sort of touches on that whole concept of, when somebody's being discriminated against and they somehow say to, in the heat of the moment or whatever, they say, go back to where you came from. Well, that individual may be born here. So I can see what you mean, that, they're always not from here kind of thing. That identity is quite important, that we resolve that in a way, and that this research would be very interesting, actually. I mean, do you think that you may have a presentation that you may talk us through as part of the main Utsav later today?
Actually, I did. No, I had this presentation prepared for my master's. How do I share it? Oh, I
Uh,
found the button. Share screen.
I think you'll be given the option to share the screen. I'm not sure whether we have that much time, but let's see if we can share it in a few minutes. But in the meantime, if
Okay.
you are able to share that presentation, we're interested in sharing that later on as well, because we've got another event as part of this series of events. So that will be quite useful. So what was the, I mean, just moving on a little bit.
Okay.
There we've got
Is
the
it is it
presentation.
is it working?
Yes, it seems to be working there. Um,
Okay. Is it full screen now?
it's yeah, I mean, we can see you. I don't know what you can see on the screen, but
And
it's
like,
your
can you
presentation is there.
see the entire presentation properly?
It's getting clearer. Yes, we can see it. We can
Okay,
see it.
great. So, do you have a question, or should I just move on with the presentation?
Well, I was going to ask you, what was the participants' perception of the authoritative bodies that your research found? So, what do they consider to be the statutory agencies and whatever?
Actually, while some of them thought that that the authoritative bodies, especially universities, were not doing enough, while some of them thought they cannot do enough. It's a problem in the entire society, and one part of the institution taking part in trying to change it will not help. Everybody has to simultaneously participate on equal footing to change it. So, like, there were very small aspects that was bothering them. For example, in universities, in some universities, not all universities, some universities, the canteens did not have halal food, and and often meat would be like a lot of the like the available food would be meat based, which the Muslim students cannot consume, and they had to actually stay hungry during the entire day without being able to buy a proper food, and because the camp, like other shops are outside campus. And in certain universities, actually, this is not for all universities, because some universities have taken steps to introduce a variety of halal food, actually. So in some universities, this was the problem. In another was, the scheduling of lectures, not lectures, like club things, like Muslims have to pray on Fridays. Sometimes they choose to pray on Fridays, and like initially they do not. Usually they do not skip lectures, but if it's club activities, they usually try to request the club activity be either preponed or postponed. I had two examples where they say that the club was really not into cooperation at all, and they actually would constantly taunt him that, yeah, you're like not exactly very friendly words, like that his loyalties lie elsewhere, and words like that. So that was quite like, this was something that is happening within the university. Another person recalled that in just after certain government legislations, the university would be really proactively monitor certain clubs or societies, while they would not do so with the other societies. For example, they would actively monitor societies based on their religion or based on their like the country of origin, like societies belonging to Afghanistan, Pakistan, or Bangladesh. They always had a teacher who would have to be present during a meeting. While when they inquired, there were other societies where the teacher just received a brief summary of what was happening in the society and during the meeting. So that type of close monitoring was like, they thought, some of the participants thought, was kind of implying that they need to be monitored to be trusted.
So there is. Okay, so we move on to your presentation then.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you all can see it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a very simplified graph of the population distribution by ethnicity in England and Wales. It actually, though, represents the percentage of population, it also represents the diversity in England. So the orange, like other than this light blue part, the entirety is the minorities of various ethnic origins. The gray part is around 2% of the total population, which of the population of the total population of Pakistani origin, and 0.8% belongs to Bangladeshi origin. So despite this diverse society that England has, around 13% of individuals belonging to South Asian minority groups, especially from Pakistan and Bangladesh, reported that they feel discriminated in various aspects of their daily life. Moving on, so giving a brief of the attitudes in British society, I would start with the Oldham riots of 2001, where it was initially it was the riot was over competition of resources. There were mills that was run in Oldham that closed down, and there was a steep competition for resources between the white population and population of Pakistani and Bangladeshi origin there. And gradually, like, there were stories that the white population is getting better jobs and housing facilities, and at the same time, the white population was hearing stories that the policies are being friendly towards the South Asian population. So there was a gradual resentment filled by deprivation and desperation that gave rise to the Oldham riots. But what came out of that was a new section of the South Asian community who was born and bred in Britain and who was no more interested in limiting themselves to the perception of the majority. They started retaliating against the second class status that was imposed upon their previous generations. And gradually, they were no more longer interested in just existing, but they were interested in claiming the right to belong in public space as bona fide British subjects. However, I am at all no longer trying to legitimize the violence that took place during the Oldham riots. I'm just reiterating of the ideologies that have taken place throughout the riots. Okay. So post 9/11 and 7/7, the situation changed a bit from ethnic resentment to a more religious identity based. Instead of making the identities of the people who were followers of Islam as a wide variety of their identity, instead of they were forced to limit their identities only about Islam. Like the center of their identity for the British society became Islam. Similar, like during that time in Britain, there were the Prevention of Terrorist Act of 2005 and similar legislative, similar other legislative reflexes that the government brought forward put the Muslim population in an interrogative lens, as if they were always to be monitored, to be careful of, which gradually gave prominence, lent strength to a pre-established fear of Islam that we usually call Islamophobia. And gradually they started promoting policies that would promote social cohesion for these population with the British community to prevent any form of extremism. And these kind of propagated a narrative that they are potential terrorists with fragile loyalties to Britain. So that, and these fragile loyalties need to be looked after and mended. And finally, I come to some of the attitudes on university campuses. So, yeah, the first is that a lot of, when asked about their concept of radicalization, a lot of staff and students juxtaposed it with Islam. So based on that, there was a selective monitoring of societies and clubs, which I also found in my own data. And these led to, like, if a teacher was not present, a club or society could not function. So the cultural development on campus, like poetry, drama, these could not develop on campus. Gradually, there was a rise of unconscious bias and a form of casual racism and explicit discrimination going on. So my research goals was, how do university students from Pakistan and Bangladesh identify themselves concerning their ethnic origin and as a part of the British community? So I did not just, though I focused on their ethnic origin, their religious identity was established by them during the study. And their own position was explored through their own voice as a part of the research goal. And the second goal was, what kind of societal hurdles do they perceive existed to their identity? There was certain challenges and conflicts that I'm going to discuss in the following sections to actually bring out the aspects, the details of this. For the methodology, I took a semi-structured in-depth qualitative interviews, as I told before, that participant observation could not be done. And I followed a constructive grounded theory methodology. And I think Lahiri ma'am asked about the theoretical perspective. I followed a symbolic interactionist perspective, where I focused on how they make meaning of their daily interactions, how they attach that meaning, and how they modify that based on their interactions in their daily lives. Okay. One literature gap was that scholars mostly focused on the explicit violent discriminatory acts, which is not actually an everyday experience of discrimination. As I said at the beginning, that everyday experience of discrimination was usually routinized and mundane. So some of the themes that I'm going to next discuss, some of the themes that came into that I developed, mainly three. So this is about their identity, and there were four main identity themes that I developed. So the first was religious, which I developed, which I just kind of discussed at the beginning. And as you see at the last part, that is a huge part of my identity. Like the lady says that her religion is a huge part of her identity and her lifestyle.
Mm.
So the next one is how they perceive themselves as an outsider. I already discussed this in brief at the beginning, and there is another quote that no matter how much they're trying to integrate, because of their skin color, to some extent, they will be identified as a Pakistani immigrant. And finally, these are for the international students. Sorry, this is the second last. For international students who always perceived them in terms of their visa status, honestly, as an immigrant and student. And this is the most interesting one I came across in terms of identities, where a girl thinks herself as of a bridge between the British culture and her parents' culture. The last line is like, I take my parents Christmas shopping, I bring my friends biryani after Eid. So she is negotiating both the cultures and bringing values of each culture to the other.
Mm.
So this is a very good example I found of
Wonderful.
attempt to create
Mm.
multiculturalism.
Mm.
Finally, the challenges, since there are so many, I'm going to just discuss
Mm.
three of them. So the first one is parental cultural challenges. So in this, like some South Asian parental culture is quite orthodox. In that sense, family honor is very important to them. So sometimes students restrict themselves, isolate themselves from participating with their British peers in fear that they might bring their family dishonor. So they often restrict their interaction. So that was one of the challenges they felt they had in integration. Second is participation. I already said that drinking was a very thing that they cannot participate in, and while majority of British culture revolves around the interaction of pub culture. Another participant shared her experience was she helped organize a conference, and at the end of the conference, one of the professors offered to celebrate, and then everybody agreed to go to a pub, and she sadly could not, and she felt really terrible about it, that I was also a part of that process
Mm.
where everybody was participating, but yet I could not participate because of their of the rest of the people overlooking my restrictions.
Mm.
And finally is the double life. That is, they had to live the dual life. One, a British life where they had to dual their cultural identity to fit in, and another in their home, which is a very close to their South Asian culture.
Mm.
Finally is the conflict. So this is the last thing that I developed. In the first conflict is religious routine, where I discussed in terms of the restrictions the authoritative figures sometimes bring. It is when a student could not actually participate in a football match because the club will not cooperate. This was not an official football match; they were just practicing. The club would not allow him to leave or to postpone the match. Second was the right to speech. This had two very distinct strings. One was where they were restricted from speaking their vernacular tongue. They were not allowed to speak it. Like this person was working in a shop, and the manager straight came out and said that you either speak in English or you don't speak at all. And the another interesting string is quite opposite to it, where the person was herself modifying how she presents her vernacular to her peers. She was talking to her parents, and she would often, insert English words so that her friends are not completely alienated from the kind of conversation they had. So in that way, she kept herself included during the time of the conversation. And
Mm.
finally, is a very important part for which a lot of them are actually victimized is the appearance of Muslimness. In this particular aspect, what I explored was the concept of hijab. What I surprisingly found that hijab was not something of piousness, but a symbolic meaning of modesty, a part of their identity, a part of their womanhood. and I found it that it was quite just for them to believe that a particular dress code can be a part of their identity. But some of them, not two of them, actually shared experiences where they were actually they experienced certain aspects of the British society that forced them to remove their hijab. And what stuck to me is that when her religion is her faith, and for someone to not acknowledge her choice felt to her like she was, like her freedom was being disregarded. So the freedom of practicing a religion, the freedom of having a principle, the freedom of having her own dignity and modesty in her own way was being disregarded. So, in terms of concluding thoughts, what I found was three concepts of having multiple cultures in one place. One was assimilation, where the immigrant community does away with their own identities and adopts the identity of the majority population. Second is the melting pot, where both of them participate and does away a little bit of their own identity and create a new identity or a new culture, where all the cultures have melted in a particular social pot. And the third is multiculturalism, where all the cultures exist side by side with their distinct identities and with the while interacting with the other cultures freely. So these are the three things that I found have occurred, where some sections of the British society are expecting assimilation, where some parts of the cities are becoming like metropolitan cities like London are becoming melting pots, while some spheres like universities are becoming multicultural.
Yeah.
So in terms of should students dilute or split their identity to fit in with the Britishness, I actually did not have an answer from my own research, so I referred to reports based on the Oldham riots, and what I came across was quite self-explanatory, and I agree with it completely. So detaching individuals from their identity to fit a majority concept of how they should behave is not celebrating diversity, but denying that there is a possibility of diversity in that nation. So keeping that in as the last note, what should we do? Can we redefine the sense of belonging? This is not just a problem in Britain, but a lot of countries, that the sense of belonging, the sense of national identity is based on what the majority thinks it should be. In several countries, from east to west. So redefining belonging would be redefining Britishness or redefining a French identity, redefining Indian identity in every sense of wherever it is applicable. So redefining belonging should be an inclusive, where as well as like while pop culture can like make if it is possible to make pop culture exist side by side with the concepts or the ideologies of Islam, looking forward to that, or creating events that would allow both some aspects of British culture to exist with certain aspects of South Asian culture, be it from Pakistan, Bangladesh, or India, or other nations like Nepal, Bhutan, or Sri Lanka. But looking forward to that inclusivity. That's it. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very deep. And, I mean, I can relate to a lot of the things that you've said there, but we don't have time, gone over our time. So thank you very much for joining me today. And I'd just like to say that, it's a pleasure to be interviewing some amazing, students who've done some really interesting work. And I hope that your research takes you to some wonderful jobs and opportunities. And I'm sure it will, because it's quite a topical area in current times, particularly. So I thank you for that. Just a little bit about cause. Celebrate Our Similarities is about sharing or recognizing our human priorities. So in a way, it relates to belonging, in the sense that, we identify climate change and personal peace as the two pillars under which we recognize things like food, water, air, well-being, mental health, all of those things, good sleep and equality. And, we're trying to promote that with good practice examples, and we'd welcome you on board if you are interested. And anybody else interested, please do get in touch through the Manavutsa website. And this has been a wonderful conversation. I agree with Manavutsa. It's been a great conversation having Sajnik Bhattacharya. Sorry about that. My name gets misspelled sometimes as well, but I think it's important to get it right. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity.
Thank you. And we're just going to wrap it up with a short video. And thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you.